with our Conversations That Matter, a masterclass from evidence to impact, advancing health and well-being with recreation and sport. My name is Jane Addams, and I serve as the Academy Executive Director, and I'm so happy to welcome you all to this Zoom meeting. And with that, I'm going to ask you to please put in the chat box where you are, where you're located, so we can get a sense because we know we have people from all over the United States. So let's share our location. And with that, Tracy, I'm turning it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jane. I'm going to ask that we pull up our slides, and I'm going to let everybody know that this will be recorded so that people can access this at a later date. But welcome to the Conversations That Matters Masterclass series. We have up to 90 professionals registered for the American Academy for Park and Recreation Administration's second masterclass in a series of 6 classes for 2026. This class is focused, as Jane mentioned, from moving from evidence to practice, advancing health and well-being with recreation and sport. Before we dive in, I have to do a huge thank you, note of gratitude. This masterclass is proudly sponsored by USTA, whose incredible partnership support made today possible. Not only is USTA a champion of learning and leadership in our field, but they are also providing the CEUs today at no cost to any of us. However, to receive the CEUs for the class today, you must be in attendance for the entire class. We will also ask you to complete the post-survey evaluation that will be available by QR code at the end of today's class on the last slide. It'll also be sent to you following the class. In addition to the sponsorship for the Masterclass series with Academy, USTA continues to be a proud partner to the public parks and agencies nationwide through their tennis venue services, USTA coaching education, and the USTA grant support. Between 2020 and 2025, USTA has invested, get ready for this, $8.8 million in grants to support public parks, recreation, and sports across the country. This strengthens the access, building capacity, and expanding opportunities for communities of all sizes across the country. The level of commitment speaks volumes about USDA's investment in people, values, and the future of our profession. So once again, thank you, USTA, for all that you are doing to support parks, recreation, and sports professionals across the country. Now, let's frame today's conversation. The American Academy's Conversations That Matter Masterclass series, they're designed to bring professionals and leaders together in a shared learning forum to explore the most important topics and challenges facing our field. These classes create spaces for honest dialogue, critical reflection, and practical insight. You'll be guided by respected leaders and practitioners who have shaped the profession today. Rather than offering quick answers, the masterclass focuses on collective learning, real world application, and strengthening our capacity to lead with intention, integrity, and impact. The masterclass will be recorded and available for you to access through the American Academy for Park and Recreation Administration's website. So now, let me introduce the speakers who are going to help us through the topic today. They are incredible. Our first speaker is Dr. Sammy Powers, an associate professor of recreation management at George Mason University. She earned her BS in recreation management and policy and international affairs, as well as her MS in recreation administration from the University of New Hampshire, followed by her PhD in recreation, park, tourism management from the Pennsylvania State University. Through her research with local, state, and national organizations such as NRPA, Pennsylvania Recreation and Park Society, and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, Sammy examines how parks, recreation, and conservation can support environmental stewardship and social ecological resilience, identifying practical strategies to facilitate more equitable engagement. Her recent studies, published in the Journal of Park and Recreation Administration, highlight the essential role of local parks and recreation during the COVID-19 pandemic and explore how recreation providers can reduce barriers for participation and foster greater engagement in physically active recreation. Speaker number 2 is Dr. Stephanie West, a professor in the Sport and Recreation Management program in the Hart School of Hospitality and Sports and Recreation Management at James Madison University, having previously served as director in the school for 3 years. Stephanie completed her BS in Recreation Administration from Auburn University, her MS in Recreation Management from Georgia Southern University, and earned her PhD in Recreation Parks and Tourism Science from Texas A&M University. Prior to earning her PhD, Stephanie worked full-time in campus recreation at the University of North Florida and then Texas A&M University. She has contributed over 100 articles and presentations to national and international journals and conferences. She has led national and state professional associations as well as university committees and boards and been elected as fellow in both the Academy of Leisure Sciences and the American Academy of Park and Recreation Administration. She received a Board of Governors Award for Excellence in Teaching and a University Service Award from the Appalachian State University and has been recognized by the College of Health Sciences, there where the research award Dr. West's scholarly focuses is on research which can be used by park and recreation professionals to best promote physical activity. More recently, her research on older adults led to the honor of being asked to give the National Recreation Park Association's 2025 George Butler Lecture at their annual conference. And to round out our masterclass, our final speaker will be Dr. Kelly Walters, an associate professor in kinesiology, department and director of student success in the College of Health and Human Services at California State University, Long Beach. She earned her BS in kinesiology and exercise science at San Diego State University, MS in exercise science from Colorado State University, and her PhD in Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management from Clemson University. Her applied research explores the psychosocial aspects of physical activity with a focus on creating inclusive, empowering environments that promote lifelong engagement. As co-founder and president of Smart Fit Girls, Dr. Walters turns research into practice by developing programs that build confidence and well-being among adolescent girls. At CSULB, she leads the Kinesiology Social Justice Committee, advancing initiatives such as all gender locker spaces and equity driven policies that expand access to physical activity. She also partners with local schools and community programs to support underrepresented youth. Grounded in equity and social justice, Dr. Walters equips practitioners, educators, and health professionals with tools to translate research into meaningful impact for diverse communities. And now I turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Powers.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about two interconnected studies that really focus on the benefits of local parks and recreation and the ways in which facilitators or providers can facilitate broader participation. And so my first study really focuses on resident perceptions of parks and recreation as an essential service, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. this study was actually focused on the state of Pennsylvania. I know Tracy mentioned in my bio a little bit of work with the Pennsylvania Recreation and Park Society. So this actually reflects a collaboration with that organization. And really what we did was we conducted an online survey at really peak time in the pandemic, summer of 2020, with residents in Pennsylvania across urban, suburban, and rural areas of the state, really matching to other demographics in the state and making sure we had that representation across different regions. And what we were really interested in understanding is, to what extent do residents really see us as an essential service in their communities? And what was really underscoring and impacting those perceptions? My second study here really focuses on understanding the role of recreation providers and recreation organizations in helping participants to navigate the variety of barriers that they face to participating in our recreational programming, visiting our facilities, and really understanding what specific strategies they use to facilitate, in other words, kind of encourage broader participation. And this study represents more of a qualitative approach with focus groups with staff and program leaders at diverse types of recreation organizations that actually span the public sector, the nonprofit sector, and the private sector. Groups doing everything from, hiking clubs, climbing gyms, rec centers, fitness centers, yoga studios, things like that broadly focus on providing opportunities for active recreation. So you'll see some of the health connections in both of these studies here. But let's get started with Parks and Recreation as an essential service. So we asked folks, the extent to which they agreed that local Parks and Rec had been an essential service in their community during the pandemic, and actually found that a slight majority really agreed that, yeah, Parks and Recreation were an essential service. And it was interesting to look at some of the differences. Well, who really perceived us as an essential service? And what we found is that whether or not someone was a user and had really used Park and Recreation services in their community in the last year mattered a ton, which again, really probably isn't particularly surprising to us, but users actually reported higher agreement to this statement. It was about 61% of users felt like Parks and Rec was an essential service compared to only 31% of non-users. So that really speaks to the important role of use and likely personal benefit from Parks and Recreation in underscoring that as an essential service in their community. But we also saw some differences with income and education, such that those with higher household incomes and higher education levels also felt that Parks and Rec were more essential in their community during that time. And that led us to really want to understand, well, why or why not, right? If people said Parks and Rec were essential, why? And if they weren't essential, how come? And so when we dug into why Parks and Recreation were essential, this is where those really important physical, mental, and social health related benefits came into play. And those were the things really underscoring Parks and Rec as an essential service. I think if we all think back to, summer 2020, peak pandemic, I'm sure many of us can relate to these things as we, those of you who are working to provide these services, and even those of us who maybe were benefiting from services provided in our communities by local Parks and Recreation. Respondents in this study talked about everything from, Parks and Rec as this opportunities to exercise and a healthy mind and body, being one of these few services that actually provided recreational opportunities and safe recreational opportunities during the pandemic that really gave people a place to go, things to do, opportunities to really feel this sense of normalcy and feel connection with others in their community at a time when otherwise things felt, a lot of uncertainty, people felt really alone. And so I think a lot of these benefits we can really see mirroring and maybe even extending the benefits that day to day we experience from local Parks and Recreation in our communities. So there's a lot of overlap between what we know that our services provide in regular times, but some added additions, I suppose I would say, related to the COVID-19 pandemic of really Parks and Rec being one of the few available and accessible ways for people to recreate. Then we wanted to understand, well, why weren't Parks and Recreation essential? And what we found is this came down to, in many cases, a lack of personal use. So again, tying to that user and non-user status, folks perceiving that local Parks and Rec were not open or accessible during that time, or that they felt they might have been open, but they were perceived as unsafe or unsanitary. And one of the big ones was really folks saying that they really had received limited communication about facilities and services being offered or safety plans. So they didn't really know what was being provided. And I think that speaks to, not just in the pandemic times, but more broadly, just that important takeaway and kind of implication of having those open and accessible facilities, but also effectively communicating available services, especially in times where folks might be uncertain about what is being provided. So big picture, as we look at this study, I think some of the key takeaways are, local parks and recreation, the benefits they provide to physical, mental, and social health from these recreational opportunities really underscore the perception of parks and recreation as an essential service. This study specifically focused on the COVID-19 pandemic time, but I think we can apply this more broadly as we think about the important health contributions that local parks and recreation make in our communities, and how use and personal health benefits specifically from local parks and recreation are really, really critical. And we saw that here as well with how users are more likely to view parks and recreation as an essential service. And so that, I think, is where kind of this second study comes in, where I think this begs the question, how do recreation providers actually work to facilitate this broader use and benefit attainment? And so in this second study, we're really looking to understand how providers are working to reduce barriers and facilitate participation in healthy, physically active recreation. So as we think about facilitation, I'm really talking about facilitators as these factors that can increase, enable people to increase, sustain, or begin new participation in recreation activity. And largely, we can think of facilitators as things that offer tangible strategies for providers to be able to find ways to encourage that new, sustained, or increased level of use. And when we conducted these focus groups with that diversity of recreation providers, we really found that providers see facilitation and facilitating broader participation as twofold. On one hand, it's really this philosophical aim that's underscored and highly aligned with their mission and their values as an organization, and oftentimes at a personal level as well, right? That's really this approach to equitably serving their diverse population and making sure that folks do have access to their services and trying to eliminate those barriers because it matters to us and aligns with why we do what we do. But that it's also this practical approach aligned with really effective management and business practices. And so providers talked a lot about how effective facilitation strategies are also really critical for recruitment and retention and marketing and customer service. And broadly, when we think about these facilitation strategies that providers are employing, I like to think about facilitators as occurring at a couple different levels. You can think about intrapersonal facilitators, which are things that might help individuals develop skill or self-confidence or abilities in a certain area. Interpersonal facilitators, which are things that could relate to the social environment and having a supportive context and people with whom to participate, for example. And then things on the more structural scale, which might relate to diversity of offerings, of programs provided, cost related things that facilitate lower cost, things that facilitate participation through such as like having available equipment or available resources. So broadly speaking, in this study, providers shared this amazing array of effective facilitation strategies that they are using in their organizations to help improve and kind of increase equitable participation in their services and use of their facilities. Roughly tried to organize these into like 6 big umbrella buckets, but you'll likely see a lot of overlap between these areas. So one of the things consistently talked about is thinking about, barriers to entry, right? How do we get people in the door? How do we get them in for that first class or that first time, coming to our gym or first participation in one of our events? And they talked a lot about the importance of offering beginner and skill level classes that really have that inclusive feel and enable people to come to a supportive environment for the first time and really have things tailored to where they are at with their skill and self-confidence. And, getting people in the door on the interpersonal side, they also talked about, leverage your current participants, right? Things like bring a friend programs help get people in the door when they've got a companion they can feel comfortable with, and then get them there for the first time to have a good experience so they keep coming back. This idea of fostering a supportive and welcoming environment was really critical across these different providers who talked about, it's so important to, when you go into a new space or even an existing space, to see yourself represented there, right? To see people like you. And so having that authentic representation of diversity in everything from marketing materials to the staff and the leaders that are on site. And that part of creating that welcoming and supportive environment also relies on training your staff to reduce biases. And so one thing that we often heard from providers about was the importance of training on things like weight stigma. Other things come back to more at that interpersonal level for helping participants to build self-confidence and build their skills and abilities. And providers talked about the importance of providing individualized attention and really training staff to recognize when someone is struggling, and particularly when they're struggling and they might be trying to navigate some type of interpersonal barriers, like maybe they're just really not confident in something. And so they're afraid to give it a go, or they don't know how to use a particular piece of equipment or how to do a particular exercise. And so that individualized attention can really help provide them with the skills and also just that encouragement and support. Other key things included, building interpersonal relationships and trust. So, investing time in that relationship building and really emphasizing in training that, relationship building isn't just something to be done when there's time or on the side, but it's really, really critical to what we do. And emphasizing that value of getting to know people and building those relationships. Other factors, a little bit more on the structural side, making sure that we're providing diverse offerings for, people of different skill levels and interests and needs. But then even more broadly zooming out, I think every context is a little bit different. And providers talked about, barriers might vary based on individual participants and context. And so taking the time to really understand and assess what barriers current or potential participants might be facing is really helpful to help organizations develop sustainable support strategies to facilitate use, kind of engage in continued use among current participants, and to help reach those potential participants who we're not yet seeing. So I know I've been talking a lot. So to wrap up here, I want to bring it all back together and just share some of these key takeaways. So this first study, we really were looking at those health benefits from recreational opportunities and seeing that really understands or underscores perceptions of parks and recreation as an essential service in communities. And that users, especially those who are likely benefiting from these health-related benefits from their recreation participation, are more likely to see us as an essential service. And if we want to increase use and really focus on that broader participation and increasing equitable access and use, that's where facilitators, recreation providers play a really critical role in facilitating that broader participation by working to reduce barriers and really help sustain engagement through those diverse array of intrapersonal, interpersonal, and structural facilitation strategies. And the use of those strategies and really the importance of facilitation is based in both a philosophical aim of, kind of a philosophical mission of and desire to really focus on that equity and inclusion in our spaces, as well as just general effective management and business practices. So thank you so much. I will pass it back to Denise to turn it over to our next speaker.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Powers. That was fantastic. I'm excited to introduce our second speaker, or reintroduce her, Dr. Stephanie West from James Madison University.
Thank you, Denise, for the introduction. I'm truly grateful and humbled to be presenting here today. But I also want to acknowledge my research team because this work has been deeply collaborative. Julie and Tony and Megan and Jill and Guangzhou and I began working together after Jill and I conducted a qualitative study with women from 6 different softball teams that were competing in senior games. Through those focus groups, we explored their experiences, motivations, and the barriers that they encountered and continue to play sport and later in life. But then those conversations raised an important question for us. How generalizable are those findings to older adults more broadly? And so to explore that, we partnered with NRPA to collect data from a more representative sample of adults ages 50 and over across the US. So we had about 1,207 adults. Our findings have since been published in several journals. However, the 2 published in Journal of Park and Recreation Administration have particular relevance for park and recreation professionals, as we believe they translate the research directly into actionable strategies for practice. And so that's why I'm here. Both articles use a sociological framework to examine how park and recreation agencies can facilitate and promote sport participation among older adults. This framework allows us to move beyond individual motivation and instead consider how interpersonal, and structural factors interact to influence participation. And luckily, I had Sammy cover some of that. The first study, published in 2019, was designed in part to identify specific programmatic strategies that agencies might pursue. Through qualitative focus groups with women playing senior game softball, we explored how rule modifications, team organization, recruitment strategies, facility access, and community sport, how they either facilitated or constrained their continued participation. Then the second study expanded that work by examining participation patterns and interest in recreation sport among a more nationally representative sample of adults over 50. In addition to identifying what older adults want from their local park and recreation, this study actually examined how well agencies were currently meeting their sport-related needs, particularly in terms of access, cost, safety, social connection, and awareness of available opportunities, all those things that had come up in the previous study. Together, I think the two studies provide both depth and breadth. The first offers detailed, practice-oriented insights from active participants, and the second situates those findings among broader national context to better understand unmet demands and systemic gaps. So our initial study identified 6 main strategies parks and recreation could adopt from promoting sport participation among older adults. Generally speaking, as I mentioned, these were offering tailored rules, assisting with team organization and development, helping with player recruitment, promoting available opportunities, securing facilities and resources for players and teams, and providing community and organizational support. So just a quick look at who our respondents were, since we had so many. In general, a quick snapshot would say that our second study found that most self-reported having average health or better, and they were generally interested in and motivated to participate in sport, but they were often limited in participation due to illness, injury, or time. And they also were constrained by overall fitness level, perceived lack of sport-specific skills, and financial limitations that prevented them from participating in sports more often. Interpersonal constraints primarily centered on difficulty finding others in their same age range that they could participate with, and many indicated an interest in playing, but they didn't have anyone to join in with. So at the community level, constraints were largely tied to dissatisfaction with the sport opportunities available in their communities. Respondents expressed concern about limited program offerings, inadequate access to facilities, and a general perception that, unfortunately, local sports systems just weren't designed with older adults in mind. But I think the key here is that both studies point to the same reality. Older adults want sport, but participation drops because of predictable barriers. The good news is that these barriers can be mitigated by you, park and recreation professionals interested in improving their ability to serve this population. So in the next few slides, I will share with you how you can consider building programs to reduce fear of injury and health concerns, lack of partners or peers, cost using low-cost options, equipment support, lack of awareness by marketing where they actually look, skill concerns by building pathways and for beginners, and non-intimidating entry points. Some of the same things that Sammy mentioned. And so time constraints through short seasons, flexible formats, and convenient scheduling also came up, and I think we're going to talk about that, I know, in a little bit. So while at the same time we want to amplify fun, enjoyment, pride, identity, and social connection, all of these were found to be major motivators in both articles, and I think intrinsically you are aware of that. So let's look at the first first category of what you can do. Build age-appropriate sport offerings, not just adult leagues that you invite seniors, or you have an adult league and say seniors can participate, but something for older adults. They want to participate with others their age. Now that can be difficult. You might not have enough older adults, and so you might have to partner with communities outside of your area to have interagency competition or play or practice. So if you're starting or expanding your your older adult programs, I would consider a program menu that's comprised of strong interest based on interest and feasibility. And so the most popular activities, no surprise, pickleball, golf, and softball. But there's also really high levels of interest, or they were already engaged in bowling, walking-based sport, hiking, swimming, tennis, volleyball. And so with the program menu, just make sure you encourage to offer a breadth of levels of sport opportunities for older adults, including those that require vigorous activity. So make sure there's something for everybody. And so multiple levels and formats. So our research would suggest that you offer 3 lanes for each sport. So like kind of a sampler platter where there's no commitment, a learn to play where they can improve their skills and their confidence, and then a recreation league where they can that's going to participate or facilitate, I should say, social aspects and through consistent play opportunities. And so I'm going to give you a specific example using volleyball that you might offer silver volleyball with an open gym and structured play and learn rotations incorporating short games or coached pauses or peer captains. And then there might be a newcomer court with a simplified serve rules or, even a lighter ball option. And remember, there's a difference between older adults who are 50 and older adults who are 80. So you might also want to, make sure that you have all those, opportunities in terms of physical activity. And so then the 2019 teams described feeling, looking at number 2, feeling in the background behind youth sports. The article calls for reviewing scheduling equity explicitly. So Park and Recreation administrators should consider age within their organizational strategic plans, DEI initiatives, anything like that. Because Park and Recreation agencies should look at their policies, make sure that they reflect the interests and needs of the community. Don't get wrapped up into, well, this is how we've always done it. So let me give you some examples of a few specific policy moves you could include. Audit the field and court allocation by age group and time of day. The older adults we talked to felt that they got the worst times. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but communicate that perhaps. Reserve consistent, predictable slots for older adult sport, prime times too, because a lot of them work and have caregiving responsibilities is what we found out. Provide comparable quality, maintenance, lighting across groups. In the softball teams that we talked to, they felt like their fields weren't as well cared for, that they got the ones kind of on the side. If space is tight, create separate seasons for different age groups to reduce conflict. And sometimes that can work and sometimes it can't. But although older adults did not appear to favor policies that subsidize older adult activity or sport participation, they didn't say, we want you to give us all the money. They also didn't feel youth activities in sports should receive priority. And so, I think it's a really, important to think about the balance there. And making sure you don't prioritize anybody based on age. So when considering older adults specifically, consider diversity within the older adult subgroup. We talked about that a little bit ago, maybe ability to be vigorously active, or maybe, different age groups, or, knowledge and skill levels. And so we found a fair number of older adults were currently working either full-time or part-time in this sense. Traditional ways of scheduling and programming during the day might not meet their needs. So if multiple age groups are interested in using a facility, maybe you could hold different seasons. We mentioned that. Additionally, collect input from your older adults in your community to see what's going on. Who in your community is being served? Who is being missed? And who might actually be overserved? Because sometimes we can do that because we hear back from participants and we give them that same information. So the biggest limitations faced by older adults in number 3 is that that the desire to play sports is impacted by health or fear of injury. And so a lot of them had limitations due to injury or illness. But like I said, they also had, who they could participate with was important. So there are some ways you can navigate some of that. Obviously, if somebody breaks their leg, there's probably not a lot you can do with that. But in terms of interpersonal constraints, not having anyone to play with, what about bring a friend pipeline? Current participants each invite one person. I think Sammy mentioned that. Buddy matching at registration. Hey, I'm new. I'm returning. and put them together. I want low intensity, put them together. I want competitive, put them together. So you're going to coordinate a team formation night. So like, an interest meeting, mini skills, some social time. Peer captains and ambassadors would be older adults who volunteer to welcome newcomers, give them a shirt, make them feel good about something. So, you could give them a small registration credit, offer them some guest passes that they could pass out, or give them some recognition in newsletter or picture in your facility. And then some concrete ways you can reduce cost barriers are a low-cost pricing tier that Sammy mentioned, short pass options. So, morning pass or a 1-week pass. So again, that trial. And equipment libraries is really important. Donation, hand-me-down drives for, especially for softball gear, soccer cleats, things that they haven't done before, maybe. Community sponsorships, local grocery stores, civics clubs, health systems, and travel support for the more organized, maybe like this, the senior games. So in number 4, we're looking at specifically trial opportunities. And so approximately half of our respondents, that's a pretty high number, were interested in trying a new sport. Yet a notable number indicated that lack skills or that other responsibilities kept them from participating. And so again, sport sampler mini camps, where you can try 3 or 4 different activities, short half-day lessons. Let them figure out what they want to do, or where they fit. And it might be that they fit with a particular group of people, and it's not a sport that they thought that they would be interested in, but they connect with those people. So in number 5, we're talking about actively promoting sports for and to older adults. And so, both of our studies suggested that they really don't know what's available. I know this is, a constant problem for us, and, they don't go looking and they don't find out. But what we did find overall, they are using Facebook. They want printed flyers distributed at senior centers, libraries, pharmacies, clinics, community boards. They suggest local newspaper and community calendars, email lists, physician referral handout. So like a one-page list of low-risk sports they would get from their doctor. But also make sure that you are marketing where they get that information. And so the last thing is to make sure that you're highlighting that these are opportunities to be active, to enjoy themselves, to be social, and to improve health. So what that means is that there should be photos of actual older adults playing, like from your community. Emphasize fun, friends, inclusion, safe modification. Beginners are welcome. Don't assume that that's obvious. They often said it wasn't. Highlight recognition, player of the week, team stories, game recaps. Promote social identity using messaging around concepts such as teams, community pride, never too old. And so the number one way that respondents said they got invited, and both studies, was invitations from players, coaches, and you, Park and Rec staff. And so those are highly important. And the last, I split this up. So Park and Recreation agencies should therefore adopt a word-of-mouth approach to recruiting more older adults, peer-to-peer invitations. When you highlight the health benefits, be specific. Lower blood pressure, lower hypertension, reduce arthritis with aqua aerobics, and these are 1/3 of our respondents had some kind of arthritis or joint pain. So that's really important. And movement helps. I think we all know that, but they might not. And so frequent posts on, on social media, learn to play clinics with various sports, utilize your co-op extension. And then the last slide on 6 about soliciting their input. I can't overemphasize how important this is. And here's a little tidbit that I thought was interesting. We did a survey and then we asked, hey, 1,200 people, what other comments do you have? 1/4 of them without a prompt said, thank you for asking. And we didn't, they want to be asked. And so I know it's a potential burden, but they really appreciated being asked. And so some quick and simple feedback components, postseason surveys, real short, 5 questions, barriers, what helped, what they want next, best times, cost sensitivity. But remember, that's how you get your participants more active. You want to get non-participants involved too. So 2 focus groups a year would be a minimum, participants and non-participants. And then consider an older adult sport advisory group. But if you do that, include beginners, women, low-income residents. So make sure you get feedback from a wide range of people. That's it. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. West. And our third speaker this afternoon is Dr. Kelly Walters. So I will turn it over to her.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about something that's very near and dear to my heart. And if you've kind of looked at my research already, you see that it's really similar to the NRPA campaign that just came out, the Get Her in the Game. So you'll see a lot of alignment there. So the 2 articles that I'm speaking about today are about SmartFit Girls. And I did want to say on that last slide, there was a QR code that goes to our website. That's a legacy website that has all of our curriculums. So throughout today, if you're interested in anything and you want to implement some of this, we have all our curriculums translated in Spanish. Our culturally responsive programs for Black and African American girls are all there free to use. So thanks, Denise. So the purpose of the research that I do, specifically related to adolescent girls, is really related to health equity. So for all of the time I've been doing research, and it's only continuing to get worse, we know that when we look at the physical and emotional wellness of adolescent girls, they tend to do far worse than their counterparts of adolescent boys. So for physical activity, we know that adolescent girls are much less likely to be physically active. So nearly 85% of girls are physically inactive. That's compared to 78% of boys who are physically inactive. Alongside that, and probably very related, is that you see this drop in emotional and well-being. So they're more likely to experience psychological distress. So girls, about 57% of girls will report feeling persistent sadness or hopelessness. So that's related to depression and anxiety. So almost 60%, that's 30% for boys. So nearly double the amount for girls are experiencing that higher level of depression and anxiety. So because this has existed and quite honest has existed for quite some time and is only getting worse, I started a program called SmartFit Girls. And the program really was created to do both of these things, get girls more active and also help improve their psychological health. And the primary modality behind SmartFit Girls for physical activity was resistance training. And that was very intentional. We know that by the time girls get to elementary school now, they already start to view physical activity as a way to lose weight. And I could talk a lot about that, but I won't today. So the idea behind resistance training was that it's more of a, hey, what can you do when your body's strong? Less about what can you do when your body's small. So the program was really designed to help girls realize that health isn't really tied to their body size or shape. And it centers the lived experiences of girls, which I'll speak to later today. We use a culturally responsive version of research that helps inform how we program. And it's really grounded in social justice, equity, and youth-centered voice. So the methods for the body image paper, because there's 2 papers on SmartFit Girls, the methods for the body image paper was kind of our traditional, we had a 10-week after-school program. You meet 2 times a week for 2 hours. It was all grounded, all of the curriculum is grounded in the self-determination theory, which really thinks about 3 things. We know that adolescents thrive when they feel more confident and they have more opportunities to demonstrate their competence, when they feel more in control, like they have more autonomy. And lastly, when they feel like they can relate to people. So in SmartFit Girls, we had groups of 10 to 15 girls in a cohort. So they had girls that were similar to their age, but they also then had coaches that were in college usually. So about 5 or 6 years older than them. And that was a really a beautiful relationship that helped with that relatedness. So for this study, we actually combined data from multiple sites of SmartFit Girls, and we ended up with 45 middle school girls across those different sites. And specifically for this project, we only used our qualitative data, which was done at the very end of the program, and we used focus groups to assess changes in body image. And if you're ever curious about how to analyze focus group data, there's a really nice 5-step process called the framework analysis, which I'm happy if it's actually in my paper, so you can see that in the references. But for practitioners, sometimes it can be overwhelming to look at qualitative data, and that's like a nice 5-step process that you can use. So the methods for the second paper, which was on the SmartFit Girls Melanin Magic group, was a little bit different. This was our culturally responsive version, our first culturally responsive approach to SmartFit Girls. I'm mixed race, but white passing. My best friend who created the program with me is a white woman. So after about 5 years of putting this program together and doing a lot of evaluation, we wanted to slow down and make sure that we were intentionally programming for all of our girls. So we did a program in Colorado simultaneously, actually in Long Beach at the same time. But this project was specifically in Colorado, and it involved 10 African American and Black girls living in Colorado. And they were part of a year-long leadership council. So this was a year-long program. They named themselves SmartFit Girls Melanin Magic. And there was regular meetings to talk about what was in the current curriculum of SmartFit Girls, what aligned with them, what did they like, what did they not like. And then they actually came in and said, hey, here's the changes. Here's what we would like. Here are different videos. Here are different lessons. Here's how body image might influence me as a young Black girl. So this is a design is called Youth Participatory Action Research, and it takes a lot of work, kind of what Stephanie was talking about, to slow down and take in the voices of our whoever we're trying to program to. But it was so powerful and actually led to changes in our curriculum that you now have access to. So one of the things I'm probably most proud of is that those girls are authors on that paper. So the girls who are part of that leadership council, we really fought hard to make sure, because they did a lot of the work. They did some of the coding of the data. They were part of the restructuring of the curriculum. They reviewed the writing. And so really strong youth voice in this paper. So some key findings for both of these papers. First, we clearly know that the program SmartFit Girls will lead to an improvement in body image. Some of the ways in which this shows up is shifting how they view the perfect girl. So girls often have an idea of what that looks like. By the end of the program, it's drastically different. We also know that this program can help reduce how they judge their own body, but also how they judge others. And this is probably the thing that I'm most proud of. The girls start to realize that their bodies are more than what they look like. Their bodies are all about the utility. What can they do with their bodies rather than what it looks like? Another strong thing that came out was they felt really connected and feeling like they weren't alone. I think sometimes adults kind of like, well, yeah, everyone has body image issues, but this is such a unique time where they're starting to develop, and to have peers to have say that they had similar experiences with body image was really powerful for them. For the Melanin Magic program, it's really interesting because there's some cultural things here that are different than the other versions of the program that we had put through. So social comparison was really strong for them. They brought up how social comparison, especially in media, influences their body image. But they also spoke about things that were culturally relevant to them. So things like their hair and how central it is to how they view themselves and their bodies, and how they think others view themselves and their bodies. And then they brought up a lot of different racialized beauty standards that they experience, and discrimination related to those beauty standards. So for the physical activity findings, we found, and this is, corroborated by so much science, that if we move our bodies, we're going to feel better, we're going to have more confidence, and our mental health is going to increase. That kind of makes sense no matter the type of physical activity. But what was unique about this is that SmartFit Girls is the first program that's ever really been studied to focus on resistance training as a modality for physical activity for young girls. And the girls time and time again brought up how being introduced to that type of physical activity was very powerful for them, for reasons I mentioned earlier, that it's really about being strong and being independent and doing things on your own. They mentioned a lot of barriers that other science has found as well. A lot of the girls didn't want to be active in front of other people, particularly boys, because of what they look like, comparing their bodies to others. For the Melanin Magic group, they brought up an interesting thing about feeling out of place when they're in different spaces, even at school, when it comes to physical activity, particularly if they're at a PWI, a predominantly white institution. We say this even in K through 12, not just universities. And then some structural barriers. So age restrictions, lack of access, kind of things that we've heard before. We know from this group that they really love the positive affirmations and a space for them to be protected with their peers. Those positive affirmations is used in some of the curriculum, but what was interesting is to see how those affirmations that we used in the curriculum also influenced their physical activity and how that made them want to be more physically active. So it didn't just influence their mental health, but also gave them some motivation to move their bodies more. And again, highlighting that the racism and marginalization compounded physical activity and self-esteem barriers for Black and African American girls. So applying this to practice, because that's why we're all here, right? Some things that we can do. Centering youth voice is key. I would say the key between all three of these presenters here is centering the voice of your participants. Shifting the focus from appearance to body function and strength. Normalizing bodies, diverse bodies, identities, and experiences. So this comes from the very beginning of who are you hiring to be your instructors? How are you marketing your programs? What bodies are you showing in your marketing? Create culturally affirming identity safe spaces, using strength training as empowerment and not weight control. By accident, adults often, I think non-intentionally, say things about weight training or any type of movement and link it to what they look like or link it to losing weight. Adolescents hear that. And so what I would love is that we kind of take that link away and find movement for enjoyment, like enjoyment, not just movement to look a certain way. Integrating psychosocial curriculum alongside physical activity. So much of youth programming is either social emotional or physical activity. And the girls really mentioned how they love being able to do both of those things in that hour, hour and a half time period. Incorporating media literacy and discussions on beauty standards. I've had many adults tell me, why are you still talking about Photoshop or whatever, kind of filtering? Girls know, adolescents know that all of this exists. I would argue that while we do know, it's really hard, especially with AI now, to even know what has been filtered and what hasn't. So creating a literacy for youth to understand that there's a good chance that what they're seeing is not real, and to slow down and have a second thought of how that might make them feel when they view certain images. Additionally, using affirmations, journaling, reflection activities, hiring diverse role models, and then training coaches alongside the self-determination theory. So really thinking about autonomy, inclusive practices. Okay, so why does this matter for practice? Well, for things I've already mentioned, we know that body dissatisfaction is prevalent in adolescent girls, low self-esteem. We know the low levels of physical activity. All of those things are connected from a public health perspective. Traditional physical activity programs usually ignore the psychosocial component while they still have the physical activity piece. And a lot of times they reinforce what we think of when it comes to physical activity in the fitness world, the thin, white, able-bodied person. These studies also show that if we use intentional, theory-driven programming, it can be really helpful in getting through our program goals. Girls thrive when they're seen as experts, right, in their own lives. And using this approach, we can really help advance health equity, social justice, and sustainable engagement in physical activity across the lifespan. I have some references, but if you read the articles, you'll see all the references, so those are helpful. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Walters. Now it's time for the conversation to occur. And so we will be sending all of our participants to a breakout room where you will have 1 to 2 facilitators that are going to help us have a conversation around utilizing research within your agencies, applying, how you might apply findings and work that you've done to the work that you're doing with regard to programming. We've got a lot of different questions. We will not get through all of them, but it's a way to start the conversation. And so what I do ask is that when you find yourself in your breakout room, your facilitator is going to ask that you have a recorder in your room, and your group will need to be prepared to just share 1 to 2 top items that you talked about within your group. So we would ask that someone within each group step up to be that recorder. You will not receive a grade for this, so don't be shy in doing so. But I believe at this point, Britt is going to start sending folks into their breakout rooms, and we will be in the breakout rooms for approximately 15 minutes.
Okay, welcome back. All the rooms have returned.
Okay.
We have all groups back now. Okay, great. Well, I know we have limited time left. We've got about 10 minutes, and I'm not going to share the screen with the slide on it telling us all we're doing the breakout room report out, because I think it's better to see more faces in here while we're doing this. So appreciate everyone's engagement in the breakout room. So I'm just going to go group 1 to 4, since we have time to hear from all 4 of them, and ask for kind of your top 2 takeaways from your group. And because I was in group 1, we will start with group 1, and Anthony was our recorder. So I will let him share with the group kind of what some of the top things we talked about were within our breakout room.
All right, so some of our takeaways was there's the presentation that good focus on intergenerational play and the peer component. So really how we can bring communities together in these spaces and span across the generations. And one of the other takeaways was being mindful of how we disseminate information and cut through the noise. If there's different verbiage, different logos, different branding techniques, how do we grab the attention of one group that is more traditional and a younger group that maybe gets information in 2 to 3 seconds at a time, as we've seen. Our research, we found that there's value in taking actual polls and getting information out there, but there's really a lot of value in the in-person component and talking with individuals and making sure that, everything that we have a conversation with them is feasible, because we know that when we talk to our community, sometimes the ideas shared might be wonderful, but it's not really something within our scope or not something we can take care of at the time, but there's value in those conversations. And then we discussed in terms of the research, we talked a lot about the research that's out there and what's available, discussed a little bit about some of the stuff we have at CORE as well too, but there's a focus on also some of the non-traditional sources that you might have. So if there's community groups, local magazines that are keeping up on trends and talking about different things, if there's big events going on like the Olympics, or I will throw this out there, as a programmer, I probably would have taken advantage of that halftime show and seeing that maybe there's a good chance for some classes around that in terms of language classes or dance classes or fun stuff like that. And then lastly, we made sure that when it comes to all of this information that we gather, we're documenting it and disseminating it and taking care of it quickly. And if that means that we don't necessarily have the internal capacity to go through with that, we're utilizing our network to find ways for individuals to help us. So I hope I covered everything. Please let me know if I missed something.
Yeah, you did great. And a couple items I think that might be important for everyone to hear as far as taking advantage of the resources that might be around you. For some of you, you have easy access to a university that might be able to support you, but that is not the case for everyone. Someone brought up the fact that AARP actually offers some services that can help with things like data analysis and those types of things. So, there might be a local high school that has an AP research class that you have some students who might be interested in doing a project. So a lot of different resources, regardless of where you're located in the country. And I think that's because one of the biggest barriers to doing the research is time. It's been many, many years since I was a practitioner, but I still remember time is the biggest barrier. There's no question to that. So, okay, great. Who was in group 2 and who is our recorder for group 2 to let us know what you're talking about?
Recorder for group 2.
Great.
Stephanie was our facilitator in there. So what we discussed, we had a representative from USTA. Sorry, there's a UTSA school in San Antonio. UTSA. And just hearing about some of the adapting that they're doing with the older adults is really good. Is that to trying to keep them involved is reducing the court size. Some of them maybe haven't latched on to pickleball, but they still like tennis, but the tennis court is just too big for them to maneuver. So reducing that court size, calling it red ball tennis. And so just looking at options and making adaptations, like we talked about for the older adults to keep them engaged and active. Another thing that was brought up is we have a hard time, public agencies really using statistical data. It's just not something that we do very well. But one of the ideas that Tracy had was, making an infographic, taking and breaking that data down and making an infographic so it's really easy to see for your constituents. Maybe it's participate, it's just taking the data and putting it down, like how many adults we have, how many adults we have over 55 or over 65, or how many youth we have. Just looking at the data, even from the Bureau, the Census Bureau, and really breaking that down, because sometimes you look at the Census Bureau data, it's got a lot of information and it's really daunting. It's got so much information. So making an infographic that breaks that down, and it's easier for people to understand. Tying research to our programs, that's one of our hardest things to do. The working with girls was also an interesting topic that came up. That was something that's really good, good information to have. We all know this, but really hearing it secondhand, I think really brings it to our forefront. And then just making a difference, if there's just one thing that you can do to reduce the barrier, to be more inclusive, to bring people together, just one thing. I mean, don't try to do 10 things. I mean, I think that's some of our downfall, is we want to do everything for everybody, and sometimes we can't. So just making a difference with one thing, and make it equitable to trying to make it equitable for everybody. So that was kind of the notes I took.
Great. And I think that's a great piece of advice to kind of end your report out on, because that's applicable across all the studies that we heard, whether you're talking about making things accessible and making a change in one way during a global pandemic, or, for middle school girls or for older adults or whatever the population happens to be. We cannot be all things to all people at all times, because when we try to do that, we're exhausted and you get nothing done, and so I think that's a really great piece of advice to remind us all, both in our work lives and in our other lives as well. So great. Group 3, who is reporting out for group 3?
I think I was group 3.
Okay.
So we had a good conversation. Kelly was our facilitator. So when we talked about how we're currently using research to guide our decisions, we really talked about like program life cycles, obviously when budgeting season comes around. And then we were kind of talking about like, how do you feel, that the data has kind of changed since we've used it. And we had a conversation about how, people are a little more comfortable providing feedback, whether it's good or bad. I think that is partly due to the COVID pandemic. So just disseminating the good versus the bad. We did have a good conversation about partnering with local universities to help disseminate that research, or that data that we collect, because we're all struggling with, staffing, money, that sort of thing when it comes to collecting that data. We also talked about, making sure we're having equitable access to the data. So, a SurveyMonkey is great, a Google form is great, it's easy to do, but not everyone can utilize that. There's still a lot of older adults out there that aren't into technology. There's people that don't have access to computers. So making sure we're, getting an accurate representation of our community. And then the last thing we talked about was, yes, like there's so many ways to get data nowadays. And numbers are great, especially when budgeting comes around, but how do we tell our story, like the real life stories, because those are impactful, and then using that data to back it up.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think the notion of, for instance, collecting data in different ways is an important one. I just finished a textbook revision, and one of the agencies that I was speaking to, their advice, which was great, and which we included with a case study of how they do it, was meet them where they are. Meet the people you want to get the data from where they are. And in some instances, that might be on iPads. In other instances, that's, as one of the people in our group said, that is going into the class afterwards and just talking to the participants, whatever the case might happen to be. There's all kinds of ways to get really good data, and not being intimidated by ways that seem like too much is not figure out a way that it's going to work for you, to at least get something. So thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic. And group 4.
Okay, I'm putting my sound on. We're group 4, and our facilitators were Sammy Powers and Terry Robertson. We had a wide range of questions that we talked to, one of which was, how did you hear about this? So we went through LinkedIn, Business Partner, NRPA, the Academy, Maryland Rec and Park, so wide variety of sources. Question we talked about was, how can research help shape our work? One of our participants said that she's now in IT. And so from that perspective, how can IT support the needs for registration and thinking outside the norm? And we talked about something a little bit later, but scheduling systems, the prioritization of space and those things. Part is using the research data to tell the story, helps support funding through grants, potentially using that data and helping, and I agree with this personally, I didn't say it, but helping educate the decision makers by giving them the information that it's understandable and relatable to the community that they are serving from. The question was asked, what strategies do we use to communicate the data? A lot of it is, obviously provided in public presentations. We have to have the data on hand to build into the presentations to know what's happening. During the pandemic, it was mentioned that every piece of research had to be cited where it came from for validation. So that's important. But it helped to advocate during the pandemic. Talked about typical barriers that we face in programming for residents. And several agreed that not having enough programs for the number of people would seem to be pretty universal, that summer camps are open now and they're practically already full. And then leveraging public-private partnerships, realizing that we cannot meet 100% of the need. So what other groups and organizations in the community are providing similar programs so that we can focus as Parks and Recreation on our mission type programming, and that we can support those community partners in what they're doing. What one actionable takeaway from the presenters was asked, and it was the realization that we appreciate the researchers.
That's great.
Time was mentioned, but figuring out what's the best way to access the research was also discussed. These types of webinars with the handouts, having access to the slides, because there was a lot of data and a lot of information. And if you're trying to pay attention, it's often easier to, we don't want to sit there with phones and take screenshots all the time. But having that information in a succinct, relatable format is helpful as practitioners. And what else could we have provided? I was asked from the presenters, and it was deemed very helpful, so that again, that communication can be shared back with our teams in terms of thinking about different age groups and different offerings, different abilities and different skill sets. Not one size fits all. And that more concrete examples for rec programmers would be helpful. And overall, we all love the flow of the presentation, and all three speakers seem very connected to each other in terms of the content and the communication.
Great. Well, that was the goal of the research committee when we came up with the idea of originally in doing these webinars, and then it got folded into Conversations That Matter, which is great. So we really appreciate that feedback. And I would just end by saying one of the things that you pointed out was a big piece of research is educating decision makers. I would also add to that, educating decision makers and our stakeholders, because they're making decisions as well as to whether they want to support us, whether they want to sign up for our programs. And so all of that is certainly an important piece of that. So thank you for your feedback as well. And with that said, I'm going to throw it back to Tracy to finish this up.
Okay, so I'm going to close us out and we're going to end on time. I want to offer a sincere thank you to the Academy's Research to Practice Committee for hosting the second Conversations That Matter Masterclass. It was outstanding. Thank you so very much. Again, this was in partnership with USTA. A heartfelt thank you to our speakers. Round of applause. Dr. Sammy Powers, Dr. Stephanie West, and Dr. Kelly Walters. Outstanding. Denise, thank you for facilitating the wrap-up discussion. We really, really appreciate that. And I have to thank your co-chair, Ellen Rogers. You guys did an outstanding job in pulling all this together. And like we said, we kind of hijacked their original webinars and pulled them into Conversations That Matter. But I hope you guys see just how well they fit. They just really do. To support your ongoing work, each of you will receive a facilitator guide so you can bring these conversations back to your teams, at staff meetings, discussions, training tools, or leadership development resources. You will also receive an action planning worksheet because we want you to reflect on what resonated with you today, and to consider how you're going to apply that to your own role, your systems, or your organizations. Remember that you'll get the full recording, which has all your slides in there. You will get all of this feedback at the end of that recording. So access that. That'll be on there. You'll get the 6 articles, and you'll get your action planning sheet and facilitator guide all through the website. And Red Barn, Britt, we love them for putting that all together. I have to thank Jane and the Academy for allowing us to host this. Britt and her Red Barn team for making sure this went smoothly. And also, of course, all of the facilitators and task force members today. We hope to see you at the next master class, which is going to be in April. Okay, we haven't gotten the date pinned down, but stay tuned. So that'll be our 3rd one, and that will be done by the Research to Practice. So you know it's going to be outstanding. See you guys again. Thank you so very much. Please remember to fill out the post-evaluation. That is so, so very important. It gives us great feedback. Thank you all.
Thank you.